Hey friends, now that the weather is getting a little bit better around here in the Pacific Northwest, I've been trying to just get out of my office more. So today we are out here in beautiful woods that are pretty near to my house, looking into the wide angle lenses from Zeiss. Now, I've been really intrigued by all of the Zeiss offerings for the Leica system. I have used multiple of their lenses over the years, and kind of growing up in the beginning of my photography, I always sort of thought of Zeiss as like the pinnacle. It was the brand that my dad and my uncle and stuff always talked about being just the best lenses out there. So you can imagine, I guess, my excitement or whatever when I started getting emails from people like Hasselblad. And then a couple months ago, I got an email from Zeiss saying that they were interested in my YouTube channel and was curious if I was interested in checking out more of their gear. And as someone who is always very curious about the offerings out there and have really loved Zeiss lenses in the past, of course I said yes. So we decided that I'm just gonna go over all of the Zeiss lenses that are available for the Leica M mount system, so the Zeiss ZM lenses. These videos aren't sponsored by Zeiss necessarily or anything like that, but obviously they are sending me the lenses to use for a couple months and then give my opinions. So today we're looking at the wide angles for their system. So that is the 15-2.8, the 21-2.8, the 25-2.8, which is totally the oddball of any Leica M mount lens system, and then the 28-2.8. So I decided to come out here to basically stress test these lenses. I find that the woods and the wilderness and stuff like this is sort of the thing that can crush lenses if they're not careful, because there is just so much detail in all of this stuff, and especially on the edges of wide angle lenses. So I'm gonna put these things to the test, then we'll go back, we'll check out the images, and I'll give you, I guess, all of my opinions on these. So first up here, we have the 28, which is just a really, really good kind of walk around. It also focuses down to 1/2 meter. So a little bit closer than the rangefinder can focus, but with live view, and if you're going to adapt it onto something else, pretty sweet gig. Here is our minimum focus distance. So this is the 28 2.8, which I do definitely wish was an f2, but you can see how small and light it is. Great little lens, and for kind of like a travel walk around thing, definitely is an enjoyable experience. And then while I'm switching, we can see the difference between the 28 and the 25. Very similar in a lot of ways. The 25 is a little bit longer, but everything else is the same because they must share the same filter size because they share the same lens hood. So this is the 25 2.8, which if you are into the 24mm focal length on, just like a regular mirrorless or SLR camera, there are a lot of 28mm and a lot of 21mm, but not a lot in that, 24, 25mm range. And then it's also interesting because 25 is where you start going beyond the frame lines here. I accidentally forgot the viewfinders that Zeiss sent over with these for the 21 and the 15, but that is where you're either going to need to memorize a focal length, which I have done, or use an external viewfinder or one of the Visiflexes if you were shooting digital. The 25 also has that 1/2 meter minimum focusing distance, so that puts us right here. And this is the M10, and it definitely doesn't focus down to 1/2 meter. The rangefinder patch stops at about 0.6 or so. So it definitely goes a little bit beyond 0.7, which is, I guess, the traditional stopping point. A few of the lenses that I've used that are like 0.58 kind of work, but beyond that with the rangefinder, if you're gonna go all the way to minimum focusing distance, you're gonna have to, move forward just a slight bit after you focus. That's minimum focus distance, and it's probably right here. Let's check. Ooh, a little further even. Yep, so right there. And now we have the 21mm that is definitely a lot thinner than other lenses I've used in the past in the 21 range. It's another 2.8, which is something I like about this range, is that they're all 2.8 lenses. And it's really lightweight. It does protrude out a little bit more, and especially when you're getting on those wider focal lengths, you're definitely gonna want to use a lens hood. And the lens hood here is very boxy. It works great for the system. There is a decent amount of viewfinder blockage, but it does have the little cutout there. Overall, it's pretty good. It also goes down to 0.5 meter, so rock and roll. And when you are at minimum focusing distance, the lens hood is almost exactly in the center. If you want an unobstructed view of your rangefinder patch, yeah, you definitely have to take the lens hood off. Overall, really lightweight and good experience. I will say as well, it looks like it's very unbalanced if you just look at this and how kind of long it is, but it's a very lightweight lens, and while it doesn't exactly completely balance because it's longer, it's definitely not something that you're going to be sick of carrying. It definitely could be an everyday walk around lens without having any real issue if the 21mm focal length is something that you're into. All right, and now the most extreme of the group in basically all aspects. This is the 15mm Distagon 15 2.8, and it is a very large, very chunky lens. Now, it's also definitely a lens that you are not going to be really using the rangefinder for. 2.8 does technically allow you to get some shallow depth of field, along with the fact that it can focus down to 0.3 meters, which is really, really close, but absent like a VisiFlex or something like that, close focusing and you know, precise focusing with the rangefinder is probably not going to be your thing here. You're most likely going to be using this, you know, zone focusing and for environmental things. Overall, though, it's not that big for a regular lens. It's just big on a Leica camera. So let's check out the viewfinder blockage we're gonna get on this thing. And the hood itself isn't that big. Oh, and look at that. So unless I'm mistaken, this lens doesn't even seem to be rangefinder coupled. So using the rangefinder would be pointless anyway. Let's look at this. So it was a bit of a quick tutorial. The way a rangefinder works, if you don't know already, you have this window and this window. This window goes through here and is superimposed on the middle, and that's what helps you focus. And then this little lever right here is what gets moved by the lens as it focuses in and out. And that ends up shifting where this little window goes across, and that's what gives you the ability to focus back and forth. And typically that's done right here through this little mechanism, but as you turn this lens, that does not move at all, which means that it's not rangefinder coupled, as they say. And that's the reason why you have to fix this particular thing where it's at to basically calibrate these lenses, which is another reason those 7 Artisan, TT Artisan lenses can't just be calibrated on a non-Leica camera. So for example, this is our 28mm. You can see this is that space right there. And as you turn, it moves in and out, which then allows that little tab on the camera to basically sync up with that, be moved by that, and then that is what, you know, tells you basically what's in focus. So as long as this piece here is calibrated to the camera correctly, then that's how you're getting focus on a rangefinder camera. But as we are here, we might as well test out the 0.3 meters of our minimum focusing distance here. And I'm focusing in on the A on my FX3, and that is our close focus distance. But if I'm focusing to the front element of the lens or the filter, I guess, which would be the easier spot, we are right here, which again, very close. Very, very close. Because we're also at 28mm, so if we zoom into 70, real close. And just because we have it for reference, I'm gonna take the FX3 and basically show you the scene that I'm photographing with these. And we're shooting this on the Sigma 28-70. So like not an art lens and not, you know, like a zoom or anything, but I found that it's a pretty good performer. So we can kind of check out what this lens is doing and then help that compare to what these Leica lenses are doing.
Another year gone, I've gotten so used to Saturday nights, just me and you. So don't leave me alone at the party, don't leave me alone. But heaven I need when everything's hell, just with one look I know you can tell that we don't really need anybody. On your side of the couch, what a comfortable quiet we found. I know I get lost sometimes, make up shit in my mind, but you know where to pull me right back, just like that.
All right, so here are our images. We've obviously seen the vast majority of these in that slideshow, but we're gonna jump in and obviously look a little bit deeper. We have the 28, the 25, the 21, and the 15. Let's look a little bit more in depth on the images and kind of the characteristics of each lens. These were also taken on a Leica M10, and I am viewing these on the Apple Studio display. So when we zoom into 100%, that's, you know, what you're seeing here. So again, this is the 28 Biogon, and there is a lot of information going on here. I will say that this type of bokeh is definitely not my favorite, but as you go into 100% here, and obviously we're focused in on, I guess, the front elements of the lens, and you're seeing these reflections, that is definitely super sharp. The bokeh isn't exactly clean. There's definitely a little bit of an outline around the edges, but it does stay pretty consistent wide open at f2.8, and these are at minimum focus distance, so it's kind of the max amount of bokeh that you would be getting. We can see that it's definitely busy and not the greatest performance in the world in terms of bokeh, but I wouldn't say it's a bad lens. It's just kind of a hard situation for this to be doing. You can definitely see, especially down here, where the bokeh is pretty intense. We are getting pretty darn consistent in terms of shape, and the lens corrections do a really good job of making everything, you know, look pretty clean across the board. I'll also add that I did not add any sharpening to this at all. These are just straight out of camera. So what you're looking at in terms of sharpness is what the lens is actually giving. And I think that is pretty darn good. We're slightly, you know, focused probably about here. The A of the FX3 is a little bit out of focus, but overall, very sharp image for sure. This is another minimum focus distance kind of test here. You can see a lot of detail on the FX3, showing that we definitely have a lot of detail. My wireless microphone here has a little bit of chromatic aberration and a little bit of kind of like ghosting, but I mean, definitely not an issue by any means. Now here we're getting into our really, really excruciating tests with very, very intense bits of detail. This is wide open f2.8. We can see there's a little bit of kind of haze, and where you would be getting some chromatic aberration, again, lens profile corrections are turned on, but I didn't go in and specifically take out the chromatic aberration. There's plenty of sharpness throughout here, absolutely. And we're getting a little bit hazy in the corners, wide open, and especially at these extremes. But I mean, there's just branches and stuff everywhere. Now, here we are stopped down. This is at f5.6, and we've clearly cleaned up quite a bit of stuff here. Everything is just super sharp. This is 2.8 as well. You can see up there, we have some issues, but relatively good throughout the rest of the frame. There's definitely a lot of detail into the middle here. You can see the ferns kind of coming out of here, and then your focus starts to fall off as we get closer. Here's another little example, 2.8, and this is like just an absolute death test right here. The middle, plenty sharp. Here is where we really start to run into some issues, but I mean, that is just like the worst, worst case scenario for a lens. At f5.6, it is a drastic difference. So 2.8, it's just kind of painterly, and 5.6, oh my goodness, so much detail. You can definitely tell that this lens does a great job. And I would say that you can see that these aren't even necessarily in focus because the focus plane is going to be further into here as I was focused on this, fallen tree. Pretty impressive, to be honest. Here's another minimum focusing distance test just to see what the out of focus elements are across here. A little busy, but I would say that the bokeh and such looks a lot better in this one than previous ones. This is at 5.6 and just tons of detail. You can see the detail in the trees there all the way out, and obviously clearly detail here. I'm focused at infinity, and at 28 mil, we're still getting quite a bit of detail in the extremes here. At 2.8, definitely isn't the case nearly as much, especially in the corners and on the sides there. You can see it really falling off there and there. And about here is where we start to pick up our stuff again. So I wouldn't say it's the best performer wide open for foreground detail, but I mean, who's going to be using this at infinity wide open? Here is just another minimum focus distance kind of thing with a lot of detail. Again, I would say that the bokeh here isn't great, and the out of focus elements feel pretty erratic and chaotic, so not my favorite look. Basically, minimum focus distance is a really, really tough area for a lens. Obviously, towards the edges, we're having issues, and it's more just the character is a little bit busy for my taste. Moving on to the 25, should be pretty similar to the 28 as they are similar lens designs and fairly similar, again, bokeh with sort of some outlines that are a little bit pronounced. This bit here is kind of where the bokeh is an issue for me, because it's very distracting. It's not very smooth, and especially with all of this stuff, again, feels pretty erratic. And I mean, you can see so much detail. Again, this is with no sharpening. It's just me focusing with the camera. And oddly enough, I am better actually focusing with the rangefinder here than I am doing it in live view. So 10 points to me. So here we go with the full-on just worst case scenario test here. We are doing pretty well across the board with chromatic aberration and detail overall. This is again wide open. This again is 25 millimeters at f2.8 and f5.6. You can see a massive difference in the vignetting as you stop down. And this is again with profile corrections on, but I didn't really mess with them too much. But I mean, at 5.6, there is a ton of detail. This is at f2.8. So you see at the edges and the corners, we're starting to get some haze and fuzz and stuff, but especially towards the center, lots and lots and lots of detail. Here we go. This is the f2.8 test, fairly similar to the 28 where you're just pretty soft up here, but at f5.6, a ton of detail, even though this technically isn't in focus. We are more focused somewhere out here, but yeah, pretty darn good performance. Here's what we look like wide open. Not a big fan of the bokeh going on down here, and again, pretty erratic. Here is at f2.8. We're not as soft as the 28 here for sure. We're looking actually a lot better from about this side to this side. And we have obviously some chromatic aberration and a little bit of hazing, but pretty good. And I mean, even that boat driving by has some detail. You can see some of the waves and the wash coming up from the boat. This is definitely not that great, and we're not looking super detailed in this side, but here we go at f5.6. We're getting detail in the clouds, we're getting detail and no chromatic aberration up here, tons of details in the trees, just doing a pretty darn good job. Here we are with the 21, and I actually like the bokeh quite a bit more. The bokeh does not seem nearly as harsh here. I mean, you're not getting as much of it, I guess, but it doesn't seem to have that kind of hard edge to it as much as the 28 and the 25 did. Yeah, I mean, we're kind of busy here, but this is 21 millimeters at f2.8. So yeah, I would say the bokeh looks quite a bit better over here. We're getting that look that I wasn't a fan of in the extreme corner here with some outlining and whatnot, but this is where we actually look pretty good, and it's got some character without being harsh. Here we are, f2.8, and no surprise that we're getting what feels like almost a little bit of, I don't know, pulling out towards the outside and some chromatic aberration and hazing at 2.8. Here is quite a bit right there, but again, good sharpness here in the middle. And here is our, again, worst case scenario, just lots of muck, but you know, you're not expecting that to be great. You're expecting this to be great here. So it is, and yeah, rock and roll. Here's where we are getting not as good a performance because you still have a little bit of that kind of smearing and it almost looks like motion blur, but obviously considerably better once you stop down. Here is our minimum focus distance, you know, just fully just blurred out to see what it looks like. And again, bokeh looks a lot more interesting and a lot less frantic. I mean, it's not the best because you're going 21 millimeters at, you know, f2.8, and also disregard anything up here because the Leica M10 can't register apertures. It just kind of takes a guess based off of how much light's coming in. So these are never accurate. They can just kind of give you a general idea. Here's another spot where we're kind of doing things backwards. We got 5.6 at this first one, and just, yeah, plenty of detail, zero issues. And all of this stuff is definitely not that great. And it almost looks blurry here, like we have motion blur, but it's not. We're at 1/2000th of a second. And it really only gets sharp into the dead center here. So even right on these sides, it's not that sharp. But again, once you stop down to f5.6, we're just great everywhere. Okay, and here is the 15 2.8, just gonna be kind of a beast. This is definitely, you know, out of focus because I'm just using live view and it's not always the best. Bokeh, again, actually looks a lot more, I guess, modern and clean, even at, you know, 15 mil than it did on the 28 and 25. And this is definitely where, kind of no matter what, 15 millimeters is big, extreme, and for tiny lens throwing onto a sensor, it's going to be pretty difficult. So not expecting quite a bit. This is going to be where it's going to be really, really difficult. So f2.8, we're seeing a lot of issues up here, but I mean, wide open in the woods going to be tough. 5.6 here, we'll see if it changes. Yeah, and tons of detail and information. We even have a little bit of sun stars kind of coming through. But as we get to the kind of extreme edges is where you almost feel that like motion blur. And to be honest, there could be motion blur at 1/90th of a second, as this wasn't with the tripod. Yeah, and here we go at f2.8. you know, same thing. We have plenty of sharpness and plenty of detail in the middle here. As we go towards the edges, that's when we're seeing a bunch of issues. But I mean, this is 15 mil in the most extreme of circumstances. And yeah, here's our stress test. We're looking not so great. A lot of kind of pull to the edges and, you know, some issues in here. 5.6, it gets better, but it's not perfect. And here's our bokeh wide open. Looks pretty good. Yeah, I'll say it's not going to be the smoothest thing in the world just based on focal length, but it does not look very distracting in comparison to the 28 and 25. Here is another kind of like minimum focus, just detail shot, you know, where again, you have plenty of sharpness in the middle here. And then we almost look like we have motion blur towards the edges. Here we go again, 2.8, and woof, that's pretty tough. Center sharpness is great. There's plenty of sharpness over here. You know, so about right here is where we still have detail, and then we start to lose it about there. And same thing, we kind of have detail here. Looks pretty detailed there as well. So, you know, there is a possibility, because this looks pretty decent, that maybe the lens itself is decentered. That could technically be, because we have pretty good detail even over here, but we definitely have that kind of fall off there. So I don't know enough about optics necessarily to let you know that, but this actually doesn't look too bad, where on this side we look quite a bit worse. So I'm not sure if that's a flaw necessarily with the lens design as much as it might just be with this particular copy. Obviously, you have come to the video of someone that forgot to do an outro on that and was clearly filming something else today as well. If you've made it this far, especially after that giant image review, leave either the book emoji or just your favorite book below to kind of bookend this thing. I don't know why I just thought of that, but that's what would be fairly interesting to me, as this is going to be a stupid long video and it'd just be really interesting to me. And if you aren't subscribed already, obviously, if you've made it this far in this long of a video, that'd be a pretty sweet thing. So thanks again for watching. Thanks to Zeiss for sending these lenses over, and I will see you all in the next one.